we'll start with this. Well, on the eve of her mixed martial arts debut, world champion Clarissa Shields says male boxers don't want to get humbled in mixed martial arts. Boxing's GWOAT has questioned the mentality of male boxing champions over a lack of mixed martial arts crossovers. And, you know, stuff like this is a big part of the reason that Clarissa Shields isn't everybody's cup of tea. Stuff like this. Clarissa Shields, here and now, would have you believe that she's crossing over due to some competitive spirit, competitive mentality, when...
This is about money.
In reality, this is all about money. The reason Clarissa Shields is crossing over into mixed martial arts is because she's not getting paid the way she wants to get paid.
All right.
And this is the same reason that Heather Hardy, Amanda Serrano crossed over into mixed martial arts very briefly as well, because they weren't making the kind of money they wanted to make in the squared circle. So they thought they'd try their luck in the octagon. And this is no anecdote or opinion that I'm imparting. This is out of Clarissa Shields' own mouth. This mixed martial arts crossover has everything to do with money.
So let's just cut the fucking crap.
I'll tell you what I think. I think that Clarissa Shields is feeling a bit apprehensive ahead of her mixed martial arts debut because she's venturing into uncharted territory for her. And she's venturing into that territory not due to a passion, a real desire to take the world by storm as a mixed martial artist. She's doing it for the wrong fucking reasons, and that's money.
That's it.
Don't get me wrong. Prize fighters prize fight because of the fucking prizes. They do. But they're still within their element. They didn't end up in that profession by accident.
They didn't.
At any moment, they could have decided to unlace those gloves, walk away. But they don't, because that's what they do, and that's who they are. That's who Clarissa is. But Clarissa's not getting paid the way she wants to get paid in boxing, so she's trying her luck in mixed martial arts. And what I think she's experiencing right now is apprehensiveness, fear, and she's projecting that fear on male boxers, when the real reason male boxers don't cross over into mixed martial arts more often is because they don't fucking have to.
Boxers oftentimes get paid more than mixed martial artists.
And this isn't a secret. It's a well-known fact. How many times have you heard Dana White's guys over there at the UFC complaining that they want a bigger purse? You do realize that Oscar Rivas made more money fighting Dillian White than your average UFC fighter on your average UFC card. I'm not fucking around. I'm dead fucking serious. That guy scored a cool $1 million for fighting Dillian White. Oscar Rivas, who has no U.S. profile. Oscar Rivas made more money in that one fight than your average, well-known mixed martial artist. So why the fuck would a guy like Oscar Rivas or anybody else decide to cross over into mixed martial arts, take up an entirely different discipline so they can end up making less money? Why would they do that? What sense does that make? Only a handful of UFC fighters have made really big prices. Conor McGregor, Khabib, Ronda Rousey in her heyday, maybe John Bones Jones, but none of those guys are making Canelo Alvarez money. None of those guys are making Tyson Fury or even Deontay Wilder money. They certainly ain't making Anthony Joshua money. Look at what he made for that Ruiz rematch. $87 million fucking dollars. A guy like Anthony Joshua is supposed to cross over into mixed martial arts to do what exactly? Make less money.
Yeah, let me reshift my focus here.
Let me reshift my focus from my real bread and butter that makes me far more money than what a mixed martial artist makes, an elite mixed martial artist. Let me do this. Let me take weeks and months, years, time, attention to train for a sport that will ultimately pay me less than the sport that I'm already in. Let me do this.
Because I'm a fucking bozo.
I'm a fucking moron, right? Why should I do anything that makes sense? Understand me when I say that what we're seeing from Clarissa Shields might be Clarissa projecting her apprehensiveness, her fears, and maybe even her anger that she has to cross over into mixed martial arts in pursuit of the kind of purses she hasn't been getting as a boxer. A fighter, a boxer, in Clarissa Shields' position might have to cross over into mixed martial arts to get the kind of prices they're looking for. But male boxers, who she addressed these comments to, they don't have to do that. How many $1 million purses have guys like Danny Garcia and Leo Santa Cruz gotten for fighting soft competition?
How many?
And you're expecting these guys to take time away from the sport that pays them better than a mixed martial artist gets paid. Take time and attention away from that to do drills and train for a sport that in the end will end up paying them less. Reverence for both disciplines is required here. Mixed martial artists get into mixed martial arts because they're comfortable in the octagon, the same way that boxers get into boxing because they're comfortable in the squared circle. Passion and love for what you do has to be the underlying theme. In the end, they're all prize fighters. They get in there, they put on a show, risk certain injury
For prizes.
for a chance at big money. They're both doing this, MMA fighters and boxers. But they do what they do because they love what they do. And that's the difference. I don't think that Clarissa Shields is endeavoring into mixed martial arts from some love of mixed martial arts, some passion. She's doing it for money, and she said as much.
She did.
I think in some ways she's grown to resent the sport of boxing, and she's not the only female boxer that I've seen harboring these kinds of sentiments. My heart is with her, and I hope that she succeeds in her mixed martial arts debut because she's too much of an egomaniac to suffer a defeat. She's priding herself as the greatest woman of all times, and that is not unanimous.
But that's what she calls herself.
Contrary to the opinions of a few, very few, Clarissa Shields isn't the number one pound-for-pound women's boxer. That designation, as it were, is split maybe 2-3 ways between 2-3 different girls. A good number of people think Katie Taylor is actually the number one pound-for-pound fighter in women's boxing. Few smaller faction of people, they'll tell you it's Amanda Serrano, and a small faction of people will tell you it's Clarissa Shields. But this is the burden that Clarissa has placed on her own shoulders by identifying herself as the greatest woman of all times. Well, people are going to hold you to that standard. You do realize that.
And if it goes sideways.
Given how much Clarissa likes to shoot off at the mouth, a lot of people ain't going to feel sorry for her. For the sake of women's boxing and the perceptions of a few that Clarissa Shields might be the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the sport of women's boxing, I hope that her mixed martial arts debut goes well, because I'd hate to think how they view the sport of women's boxing based on what happens in that cage.
It don't just affect Clarissa.
It affects the perception of women boxers here in the United States, where some view Clarissa as its very best fighter. That if the best woman boxer goes in that octagon and gets her ass kicked, well, what's that say about women's boxing? Not everyone is as open-minded and level-headed as I or you, but that could very well affect people's perceptions of the sport in this part of the world moving forward if things go sideways for Clarissa, and I don't want that.
I want her to win.
Then I want her to get the fuck out of that octagon.
That ain't your area of expertise.
In other news, Ring Magazine has updated their current pound-for-pound rank standings. Josh Taylor emerges in the number 5 spot, though there is much to reconcile here for the fight fans. Several fight fans caught wind of these updates, got a look at the list, and they weren't happy. They couldn't understand how it was that Vasyl Lomachenko still manages to retain a spot on this list after having suffered his second defeat, where Mikey Garcia was immediately bumped off the list as soon as he lost that fight to Errol Spence Jr. How Vasyl Lomachenko still has a rank on this list in defeat, and Jermell Charlo, unified Ring Magazine and lineal junior middleweight champion Jermell Charlo, is nowhere to be found on this list, even though he's on the verge of becoming the undisputed champion of his division. There is much to reconcile here. Oleksandr Usyk, who hasn't been a champion in roughly 2-3 years, and he's only had 2 fights since then. Neither was a showing that was all that remarkable.
Honestly.
That warranted a number 4 spot on the list. I mean, it goes back to what I always tell you guys. You see a list like this where Errol Spence Jr. is ranked ahead of Teofimo Lopez, and all it's going to do is leave you scratching your head. It makes you wonder why you're even following the goddamn list.
How does that make sense?
Teofimo Lopez has faced the same number of world champions as Errol Spence Jr., with the difference being that Teofimo is the lineal champion of his division. Errol Spence Jr. is not. Teofimo Lopez, at minimum, is in possession of 3 of the 4 alphabet titles at his weight and the Ring Magazine title. Errol Spence Jr. is not. Teofimo Lopez actually fought someone that was ranked on this list and is still ranked on this list, whereas Errol has not. Yet Errol maintains a rank ahead of Teofimo Lopez. How is one supposed to reconcile that?
You really can't.
Not based on logistics, not based on the facts, and not based on the stats. Even more infuriating to the fight fan is that the panel that presides over this list and governs its pecking order pick and choose when they want the facts and the stats to matter. I mean, not that long ago, Vasyl Lomachenko graced a top spot on this list ahead of some other fighters that had accomplished more than he did. But based on what the editor's panel wants, how they want the list to look, well, that's how it comes out. And it pisses off fight fans, it really does. Because it's chicanery. If it's anything, it's that.
Chicanery.
It's favoritism. Brazen, outright favoritism. And, the fight fans can structure a list however the fuck they feel like. They're not held to the same standard that Ring Magazine is, because Ring Magazine has often been referred to as the Bible of boxing, and these days the Bible of boxing seems to do quite a bit of blaspheming.
And its scribes of false prophets.
This ain't your father's era of boxing, to where maybe you ain't got access to Sporty Lewis, so you can pick his brain and ask him some questions, why he feels the way that he feels. The Burt Sugar era is over. These days, the boxing scribes, as they were, they aren't readily available for comment.
These days.
They can be asked questions. And when one such as Dougie Fisher of Ring Magazine cannot reconcile why it is that Errol Spence Jr. is ranked ahead of Teofimo Lopez, why it is he's ranked ahead of two-division champion Juan Francisco Estrada, what the hell is Vasyl Lomachenko still doing on there if he's coming off of his second professional loss? You're telling me that Vasyl Lomachenko in defeat deserves a spot more than Jermell Charlo in victory?
Jamel's on the verge of becoming an undisputed champion.
Isn't that why you guys ranked Alexander Usyk in the first place? Isn't that why you ranked Usyk? Isn't that why you ranked Gennady Golovkin? Because of the world titles that they unified and the number of title defenses, things of that nature. What? Those statistics, they only matter when we're talking about certain fighters? Is that how this works? Well, then it's no wonder that Ring Magazine doesn't hold the luster, the prestige that it once did, because it's got a bunch of guys playing favorites thinking nobody's gonna notice.
It's got a 4-division champion on the bottom of the list.
4 fucking weight classes, Japan's own Kazuto Ioka. 4 of them. This guy's been a world champion in 4 of them, and he's on the bottom. Now, as infuriating as all of this might be to the fight fan, seeking catharsis, seeking to make sense of it all, an even playing field for all fighters, to be ranked accordingly based on their accolades. The people over there at Ring Magazine are already suffering the consequences of their so obvious chicanery, because the magazine has lost its luster, it has lost its prestige. There are plenty of people out there that don't swear by their rankings anymore. They know it's just a fucking popularity contest.
In an era where print media is dying,
objectivity and integrity could be the proverbial life raft that keeps such a publication like Ring Magazine afloat. Because I can tell you right now, Ring Magazine ain't nowhere near what it used to be. Myself, for many years, I actually ignored the pound-for-pound conversation altogether due to the obvious logical fallacies like the ones on display here by way of Ring Magazine. I didn't keep up with the lists. I didn't keep up with those kinds of conversations because nobody wanted to call it down the middle, and the lists themselves, they never made much sense. Only in recent years did I decide to devise a governing criteria for what would be my own list. And that's the only list I swear by. Approximately 4 years ago, February of 2017, the very first Ring IQ pound-for-pound list was published. And I will admit that the list wasn't perfect. It was really just a rough draft of what we see here today. Laying the ground rules, the governing criteria that would structure the list's ultimate pecking order and how the list would operate moving forward. I will admit that even here today, there are those that find fault with some of the list's ground rules. The list itself is not perfect, but it's not supposed to be perfect. It's supposed to be fair. And finally, the viewing figures are in for this past weekend's Taylor versus Ramirez undisputed junior welterweight title fight. The broadcast drew in a peak audience of 1.6 million viewers on ESPN, averaging 1.3 million viewers. And I am very pleased with these numbers. I'm very encouraged by them because as titillating a matchup as this matchup was, it was a matchup that wasn't promoted nearly as much as it should have been. And a lot of people noticed this in the days and weeks leading up to the fight, asking whether or not Top Rank was really doing everything they could to let people know this fight's gone down. Now, you could look at these numbers and say that the ends justify the means, but a lot of people got the distinct impression that Top Rank wasn't doing as much as they could to promote this fight. Couple that with all the big news that broke the week of the fight. You know, that while this won his arbitration, that Errol Spence Jr. would be facing Manny Pacquiao later on this summer.
A lot of distractions.
A lot of news that might get people talking about anything but the undisputed junior welterweight title fight. So looking at these numbers and seeing that well over a million people were interested in this fight, wanted to know what was going to happen, that is very encouraging, as there was enough there working against
The fight's buzz.
Taylor versus Ramirez ended up being a very good advertisement for the sport of boxing and all those tuning in. Well over 1 million homes here in the United States. It was a good advertisement, a great advertisement for the sport of boxing, because you had two unbeaten champions laying it all on the line for the undisputed junior welterweight championship, and the right man won the fight. That's very important that the right man won the fight, because I shudder to think how much of an adverse reaction would have got, and how adverse that would have been for the sport of boxing had the decision gone the other way, or the fight scored a draw, something along those lines. That's the kind of stuff that turns people away from boxing. When you're watching a boxing match and you see with your own two eyes what's going on, but the referee and the officials are trying to tell you something else, based on some ulterior motive, some agenda. That turns people away from the sport of boxing. So I'm very much glad that the right man won the fight.
And that over 1 million people got to see him do it.
I do wonder what the fight did by way of Fight TV, FITE TV. Those elsewhere in the world, they didn't get to see it on ESPN or ESPN Plus. Elsewhere in the world, if you were elsewhere in the world, you had to purchase it as a pay-per-view. For whatever reason, the people over there at Sky, BT, they didn't think enough of the match to pick it up themselves.
Sky did pick up Mayweather versus Logan Paul, though.
If you can believe that. Nevertheless, Taylor versus Ramirez was a great advertisement for the sport.